Emily never thought a simple warning from her husband would matter, but that evening stayed with her in a way she didn't expect, even though she tried to laugh it off at the time. It had been an ordinary night in their quiet home in a small American suburb, where everything felt calm and predictable, just like their marriage had become over the years. Daniel was sitting across from her at the dinner table, watching her with a thoughtful expression, the kind he only wore when something was bothering him, but he didn't want to sound controlling or unfair. He spoke gently, choosing his words with care, and said he felt something was off about her colleague, Ryan. He didn't accuse, didn't demand anything, just said that the way Ryan looked at her and the way he talked sometimes didn't feel respectful of boundaries. Emily smiled and shook her head, brushing it aside quickly, telling him he was overthinking and that Ryan was just friendly. She even teased Daniel a little, saying he sounded jealous, and that made him go quiet, not because he was angry, but because he didn't want to argue. Emily didn't notice the slight sadness in his eyes as he dropped the subject. To her, it was nothing serious, just a passing comment, something that didn't deserve attention, and she moved on without a second thought. The next morning at work, everything felt normal, but there was a small shift in how she noticed Ryan. He greeted her with his usual easy smile, holding the door open for her, making a light joke about how she always arrived just on time, and she laughed, feeling that small lift in her mood that had become familiar. Ryan had a natural charm that made people comfortable around him, and he used it without effort. He remembered details about her life, like her favorite coffee or the fact that she preferred working in quiet spaces, and those small things made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't that Daniel didn't care, but life had become busy. Routines had taken over, and their conversations had become shorter, more practical. Ryan's attention felt different, fresh, almost exciting, and Emily didn't question it. She told herself it was harmless, just a good work friendship, something that made long days easier. As the day went on, Ryan offered to help her with a project, leaning over her desk, explaining things in a calm and patient way, and she noticed how close he stood, how his voice softened when he spoke to her. There was nothing clearly wrong in his actions, nothing she could point to and say this crossed a line, but there was a feeling she couldn't fully explain, something just slightly beyond normal. For a brief moment, she remembered Daniel's words from the night before, but she pushed the thought away quickly, telling herself she was imagining things. She didn't want to make something out of nothing. Instead, she focused on the comfort of the moment, the ease of their conversation, the way Ryan made even simple tasks feel lighter. Days started to follow the same pattern. Ryan would check in on her, ask how she was doing, compliment her ideas during meetings, and sometimes stay back just to finish tasks with her. Emily began to look forward to those moments without realizing it. It wasn't a big change, just a quiet shift in her routine, but it was there. At home, Daniel remained the same, kind, steady, always there. But now she noticed the difference more clearly. His questions about her day felt simple compared to Ryan's deeper interest. His quiet presence, once comforting, now felt almost too predictable. She didn't mean to compare them, but it happened naturally, without effort. One evening, as she sat with Daniel in the living room, he asked again, in a calm and careful tone, if everything at work was going well. Emily nodded quickly, giving a short answer, not wanting to open the topic again. She didn't lie exactly, but she didn't tell the full truth either. She didn't mention how often Ryan made her smile, how their conversations were starting to feel more personal, or how she had begun to think about him even after leaving the office. She told herself it wasn't important, that it didn't mean anything, and that there was no reason to worry Daniel over something so small. But deep down, a quiet voice inside her knew she was starting to step into a space she didn't fully understand. The next day, something even smaller happened, but it stayed with her longer than she expected. Ryan made a comment about how they worked well together, saying they had a natural connection, and he smiled in a way that felt different from his usual friendly tone. Emily paused for a second, just a second, feeling something shift inside her, a mix of surprise and something else she didn't want to name. Instead of stepping back or changing the subject, she smiled back, letting the moment pass as if it meant nothing. That was the moment, quiet and almost invisible, where things began to change in a deeper way. She didn't realize it then, but she had made a choice, not a loud or clear one, but a small decision to ignore what she felt and continue forward. That night, as she got ready for bed, Daniel was already asleep, his face calm, his presence steady as always. Emily stood there for a moment, looking at him, thinking about how long they had been together, how much they had built over the years. She felt a brief sense of guilt, like a soft ache in her chest, but she couldn't fully explain why. Nothing had happened, she told herself again. There was no reason to feel this way. Still, as she lay down beside him, her mind drifted back to the office, to Ryan's smile, to the way he made her feel noticed and alive in a way she hadn't expected. She closed her eyes, trying to push those thoughts away, but they stayed, quiet and persistent. And somewhere between her denial and her comfort, the first real crack in her certainty had already begun to form, even though she refused to see it. Emily didn't notice exactly when things changed because it happened slowly, almost quietly, like a shift in the air that no one points out but everyone feels. What started as simple conversations with Ryan began to grow into something deeper, more personal, and harder to ignore. At first, it was just small talk during breaks, light jokes during meetings, and occasional help with work tasks. But soon those moments stretched longer than necessary, turning into long discussions about life, goals, and feelings. Ryan had a way of asking questions that made Emily pause and think, questions no one had asked her in a long time. He wanted to know what made her happy, what she used to dream about, what she felt she had lost over the years. Emily didn't answer everything at once, but little by little, she opened up, sharing parts of herself she had kept quiet, even from Daniel. She spoke about how life had become routine, how her days felt the same, how sometimes she felt like she was just moving forward without really feeling anything new. Ryan listened carefully, never interrupting, never judging, and that made her feel understood in a way that surprised her. He didn't say anything directly against her marriage, but his silence and his soft responses made her feel like her emotions were valid, like she deserved more than what she had settled into. That feeling stayed with her long after their conversations ended. At home, Daniel continued being his usual self, kind, responsible, and calm. But now Emily noticed the gaps more clearly. When he asked about her day, she gave short answers, not because she wanted to hide anything at first, but because she didn't know how to explain what she was feeling. Their conversations became shorter, filled with simple updates instead of real connection, and Emily didn't try to change it. Part of her felt it was easier to keep things surface level at home while she explored her deeper thoughts with Ryan at work. One evening, something new happened that made everything feel different. Ryan sent her a message after work hours asking about a project detail. It was a normal question, something anyone could ask, and Emily replied without hesitation. But the conversation didn't end there. It moved from work to casual talk, from casual talk to personal thoughts. And before she realized it, they had been texting for hours. Emily sat on the couch with her phone in her hand, smiling at the screen, feeling a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. When Daniel walked into the room and asked who she was talking to, she quickly said it was work and put her phone down. That moment felt small, but it left a mark. It was the first time she chose not to share something honestly, the first time she felt the need to hide a simple conversation. She told herself it wasn't a lie, just a detail that didn't matter, but deep inside, she knew it mattered more than she wanted to admit. As days passed, texting became a regular thing. Ryan would message her about random topics, sometimes about work, sometimes about things that had nothing to do with the office. He shared stories from his past, his struggles, his ambitions, and Emily found herself doing the same. She began to look forward to his messages, checking her phone more often than usual, feeling a small rush every time his name appeared on the screen. It wasn't something she planned, it just happened, growing naturally, quietly, until it became part of her routine. At work, their connection also became more noticeable. They spent more time together, often choosing to work side by side even when it wasn't necessary. Their conversations felt easy and natural, filled with laughter and understanding, and sometimes silence that didn't feel uncomfortable. Emily started to notice how Ryan looked at her, not in a way that was obvious to others, but in a way she could feel. His attention felt focused, steady, and different from anything she had experienced before. She didn't step away from it. Instead, she stayed, letting those moments happen, telling herself it was still harmless because nothing clear had crossed the line. But the truth was, the line had already begun to blur. At home, things felt quieter. Daniel didn't change, but Emily did. She became more distant without realizing it, her mind often somewhere else even when she was sitting right next to him. When he spoke, she listened, but not fully. When he smiled, she noticed, but it didn't affect her the same way. She didn't mean to pull away, but she was, slowly and steadily. One night, as they sat together at dinner, Daniel tried to start a deeper conversation, asking her if she was truly happy. Emily paused, caught off guard by the question, and quickly answered yes, not wanting to explore it further. Daniel nodded, but there was something in his expression that showed he wasn't fully convinced. He didn't push, didn't argue, just let the moment pass, but the silence that followed felt heavier than words. Emily noticed it, but instead of addressing it, she chose to ignore it, just like she had ignored his earlier warning. Back in her room later that night, she picked up her phone and saw a message from Ryan waiting for her. She smiled without thinking, her mood lifting instantly, and she replied, letting herself fall into another long conversation that felt easy and comforting. She didn't question why she felt this way, didn't stop to think about what it meant, because facing those questions would make things real, and she wasn't ready for that. She convinced herself again that it was just friendship, just a connection that happened naturally, nothing more. But deep inside, a quiet part of her knew the truth was more complicated. The more she shared with Ryan, the more she kept from Daniel, and that gap between her two worlds began to grow wider. It wasn't built on one big decision, but on many small ones, each one easier to ignore than the last. And as Emily continued down this path, she didn't realize that she was slowly stepping into a place where turning back would no longer be simple. Because sometimes the biggest changes don't come from one moment, but from many quiet choices that feel harmless until they aren't. Emily tried to tell herself that everything was still under control, but the truth didn't wait for permission anymore. It started showing up in quiet moments she could no longer ignore, like when she woke up and the first thought in her mind was not about her day or her home, but about Ryan, or when she found herself smiling at her phone without realizing it, only to quickly hide it if Daniel walked into the room. And slowly she began to understand that what she once called harmless had turned into something deeper, something that had a hold on her emotions in a way she had never planned. At work, things felt different now, more intense, more personal, as if every conversation carried a meaning beneath the surface, and even silence between them felt full of unspoken words. And Emily noticed how often she looked for Ryan in a crowded room, how her mood shifted depending on his presence, how her day felt lighter when he was near and strangely empty when he wasn't. And that realization made her uneasy because it showed her a truth she didn't want to accept. Ryan, on the other hand, didn't rush anything. He stayed calm and patient, but his attention became more focused, more intentional. And one afternoon, as they sat together after most people had left the office, he finally said what had been building for weeks, his voice quiet but steady as he told her that he felt something real between them, something he couldn't ignore anymore, and he didn't demand an answer or make her uncomfortable. He simply spoke his truth and let the silence sit between them. Emily felt her heart race, not just from surprise, but from recognition, because deep down, she had felt it too, even if she had never said it out loud. And for a moment, she didn't know what to say, because the right answer was clear, but her feelings made it complicated. And in that pause, she realized something that shook her more than his words. She didn't feel ready to push him away completely, and that scared her. She finally responded in a careful way, saying they needed to be careful, that things were not simple, but even as she spoke, she knew her words were not as firm as they should have been. And Ryan noticed it too, not with a smile or a reaction, but with a quiet understanding that said more than anything else. That evening, when Emily returned home, everything felt heavier, like she was carrying something she couldn't put down. And when Daniel greeted her with his usual calm warmth, asking how her day was, she felt a sudden wave of guilt that made it hard to look him in the eyes, and she gave a simple answer, avoiding details, moving through the conversation quickly, as if that would make the feeling disappear, but it didn't. It stayed with her, growing stronger with every passing minute. During dinner, Daniel watched her carefully, noticing the way she seemed distracted, the way her responses came late or not at all, and after a moment, he gently asked if something was bothering her. His voice soft, not accusing, just concerned, and Emily felt the weight of his question because she knew he deserved honesty. But instead, she forced a small smile and said she was just tired, hoping that would be enough. And Daniel nodded, but there was something in his eyes that showed he wasn't fully convinced, yet he chose not to push further, choosing peace over conflict, something he had always done. Later that night, as they sat in the living room, Daniel tried to start a deeper conversation, talking about their plans, their future, small things that once brought them closer. but Emily struggled to stay present, her mind drifting back to Ryan's words, replaying them again and again, and she realized how far she had already drifted emotionally, even if nothing obvious had happened, and that realization made her feel both scared and sad. When she finally went to bed, she lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the path she had taken without realizing it. And for the first time, she admitted to herself that this was no longer just friendship. It had become an emotional connection that was pulling her away from her marriage, and she couldn't deny it anymore. The next day at work, everything felt more serious, as if a line had been drawn that could not be unseen. And when she saw Ryan, there was a brief moment of silence between them before they started talking normally again. But the ease from before was replaced by a quiet awareness of what had been said, and Emily felt a mix of comfort and tension at the same time, because part of her wanted to stay close to him, while another part knew she needed distance. Throughout the day, she found herself thinking more carefully about her actions, noticing how often she leaned into their conversations, how easily she smiled at him, how natural it felt to share things with him that she didn't share at home. And that awareness made her realize that the problem wasn't just Ryan's feelings, it was her own, because she had allowed this connection to grow without setting clear boundaries. By the time she returned home that evening, the weight of everything felt almost too much to carry, and when Daniel greeted her again, there was a quiet kindness in his voice that made her chest tighten, because she knew he had been trying all along, even when she wasn't fully present, and she started to see him differently in that moment, not as someone predictable or distant, but as someone steady who had always been there, even when she stopped noticing. As she sat across from him, watching him talk about something simple, she realized how much she had taken that stability for granted, how she had compared it to something new and exciting without understanding its true value, and that thought brought a deep sense of regret that she couldn't easily shake. For the first time, Emily understood that she was standing at a turning point, not because something dramatic had happened, but because she could no longer pretend that everything was normal, and she knew that whatever she chose next would shape everything that followed. Because sometimes the hardest part is not making a mistake, but realizing it while you still have time to face it. And as she sat there in silence, caught between two emotional worlds, she felt the weight of a decision she could no longer avoid. Emily made her decision the next morning, not with confidence, but with a quiet understanding that she could not keep living between two emotional worlds. So when she reached the office and saw Ryan, she didn't wait for the usual conversation to begin. She asked him if they could talk for a moment, her voice steady, even though her heart felt heavy. And when they stood in a quiet corner, she told him clearly that they needed to step back and keep everything strictly professional, that whatever connection had formed between them could not continue. And she chose her words carefully, not blaming him, not blaming herself, just accepting that things had gone too far emotionally and needed to stop before more damage was done. And Ryan listened without interrupting, his expression calm but distant, as if he had already expected this outcome. And after a brief pause, he nodded and said he understood, that he respected her decision, and that he never wanted to cause problems in her life. And his response was simple, almost too simple, leaving Emily with a strange feeling of emptiness, as if something that once felt so meaningful had ended without resistance. And as she walked back to her desk, she expected to feel relief, but instead she felt a quiet ache, like she had closed a door that she had never fully explored, and that feeling stayed with her throughout the day, making everything seem slightly dull, slightly quieter than before. Over the next few days, the distance between her and Ryan became real and visible, their conversations limited to work, their interactions polite but brief, and the easy connection they once had faded quickly, replaced by a professional silence that felt unfamiliar. And Emily noticed how much her routine had been shaped by those moments with him, because without them, her days felt longer, less exciting, and she realized how deeply she had allowed herself to depend on that emotional energy, even if she had never admitted it before. And at the same time, she also felt a growing awareness of what she had risked, because every time she thought about the situation, her mind returned to Daniel, to his quiet warnings, his steady presence, and the way he had tried to understand her without forcing anything. At home, Emily made a real effort to reconnect, not in a dramatic way, but through small changes. She started asking Daniel about his day with genuine interest. She listened more carefully. She tried to bring back the warmth that had slowly faded between them, and Daniel responded with kindness as he always did. He smiled, he talked, he appreciated her effort, but there was something different now, something subtle that Emily could feel even if it wasn't spoken, a slight distance in the way he looked at her, a pause before he responded, as if he was still trying to understand where she stood. And that quiet shift hurt more than she expected, because it showed her that even without knowing everything, he had felt the change in her long before she admitted it to herself. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Emily decided to break the silence that had been growing between them. She didn't share every detail, but she spoke honestly about feeling distant, about getting caught up in work and losing focus on what mattered. And Daniel listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. And after a moment, he said something that stayed with her. He said he had felt her slipping away for a while, not suddenly, but slowly. And he didn't know how to reach her without pushing her further away, so he chose to wait, hoping she would find her way back on her own. And those words hit Emily deeply, because they showed her that while she was looking elsewhere for connection, Daniel had been standing still, holding on to what they had, even when it felt uncertain. From that moment, Emily understood that fixing things would not be quick or easy, because trust was not something that returned overnight. It needed time, patience, and consistent effort. And she accepted that without hesitation, she didn't expect everything to go back to how it was. She only wanted to move forward in a better way. And over the following weeks, she stayed committed to that goal. She created boundaries at work, kept her distance from Ryan, and focused on rebuilding her relationship at home, not through big promises, but through small, meaningful actions. And slowly, those actions began to make a difference. The conversations with Daniel became more natural again. The silence between them felt less heavy, and the connection they once had started to return. Not exactly the same as before, but more aware, more intentional. Still, Emily carried a sense of regret that didn't fully disappear, not because she had made a dramatic mistake, but because she had allowed something small to grow into something that could have cost her everything. And she often thought back to that evening when Daniel had first shared his concern, how easily she had dismissed it, how quickly she had chosen to trust her own judgment without considering his perspective. And she realized that sometimes the people closest to us can see things we choose to ignore, not because they doubt us, but because they care enough to notice what we might miss. One quiet night, as Emily and Daniel sat together on the couch, watching a movie they barely paid attention to, she reached for his hand again, this time more gently, not out of fear, but out of a genuine desire to hold on to what they were rebuilding. And Daniel looked at her for a moment before holding her hand back, not as tightly as before, but not distant either, just steady. And in that simple gesture, Emily felt a sense of hope, not perfect, not complete, but real. And she understood that while she could not erase the past, she could choose how to move forward, and that choice mattered more than anything else. As time passed, the memory of Ryan faded into something distant, a lesson rather than a loss, and Emily no longer felt the pull she once did, because she had faced the truth and chosen differently. And in doing so, she gained a deeper understanding of herself, her relationship, and the importance of protecting what truly mattered. And although the regret never fully disappeared, it became a quiet reminder, not of failure, but of growth, showing her that sometimes the hardest lessons come from the smallest choices, and sometimes the greatest strength is not in avoiding mistakes, but in recognizing them, learning from them, and finding the courage to make things right before it is too late.